Hello everybody, Dark Ninja here today. Today I'm going to be talking about what are the best tanks for Onslaught and how should you set up those tanks. And this is accurate as of April 16, 2025. The season of, let's see, season of the Jade Manticore. So there have been some changes to the perks, or I should say the abilities of different tanks, which has made it so that overall, the vehicles are far more balanced, and the different classes of vehicles are far more balanced, and there's nothing that's super OP and meta that you absolutely need to play nowadays. So I'm just gonna go over some rough picks and try to give you some rough guidelines for which tanks you should pick, especially depending on your skill level and kind of where you're at in terms of ranking. So first thing I wanted to cover is I'm number one on the leaderboard right now. This is after the first day on North America. And last season, I got second on the leaderboard, and I also play Onslaught on a professional team. So I just wanted to include that just so that you know that I somewhat know what I'm talking about. All right, so let's first go over light tanks. For the light tanks, I think I would only recommend these two, the RHM Panzer and the EBR. I would not recommend playing these tanks if you are not very confident in your light tank skills and I would only really bring them if you're in higher elo lobbies. So I'm talking like gold plus lobbies or the top probably champ plus lobbies where the top players are champs and legends, for example. If you're in like a bronze lobby or iron lobby, then there's really no reason to bring a light tank on most maps. And you should just leave that to the players who are higher rank, in my opinion. But yeah, RHM and EBR are the only two good light tanks. When it comes to medium tanks, you have a lot more choices. So some good ones are all the ones shown here, but I wanted to, I guess, point out the ones that I think are the best. I think, in my opinion, the Leopard is extremely situational. I wouldn't pick this ever, pretty much. TVP, I would pretty much never pick as well. The only ones that you should really be picking are the E50M, the Sente X, and this one you really only want to pick if you have one or if you have zero of these on your team. Because if you have two Sente X's with their ability Inspire, it kind of just they don't stack with each other. So if you have two Inspired mediums on your team, then you're kind of wasting your ability a little bit. So you should only ever have one Inspired medium on your team. 430U is another really good pick. It has the same ability as the E50M. Both very strong tanks for medium tanks. Batchat takes a little bit more skill to use, but it is another really strong medium tank. And I would recommend it for better players like your champs and your legends to play Batchat more often. And then one more tank, which is pretty important to have, not crucial, but is kind of important, is the CS63 or the Hurricane. Either one is fine. This tank is good for maps like Mines and potentially Tundra, but mostly just for Mines is the important map to have this one on in case your team is taking the hill and you need more mediums, then you should be able to pick a CS63. And I should mention on Mines, you never really want to have more than 4 CS63s. If you have more than that, then you're kind of going overboard, and you're probably going to lose the game if they go heavier. Let me list some honorable mentions. The M60 works. It's similar to the Centurion Action X. They're pretty much interchangeable, but I usually prefer the Sente X, so I would pick that instead. Same with the Patton. It's kind of interchangeable with the Sente X, but I just think the Sente X is the best out of those three in general, which is why I don't have the other ones selected. STB also fits into that category. All of these are Inspired medium tanks with their ability, but I think the Sente X is the most well-rounded, best of them all. And that also goes for the 121B. It's another Inspired medium. But yeah, that's all for mediums. If you're not sure which medium to pick, then I would honestly just stick with the E50M, the 430U, the Sente X, and then if you're good, then the Batchat. And for only mines, the CS63. Otherwise, it's not worth using a medium tank, in my opinion. When we go to heavy tanks, These are all the viable heavies. Looking at the other heavies that I have on here, yeah, I don't really find any of these other heavies to be viable. 60 TP is usable, but it got nerfed. Its reload got nerfed by quite a lot, and its HP also got nerfed, and that makes it quite a lot weaker nowadays. So it's not one of my top recommended heavies. You can use it, though, if you don't have an E100, for example, or a BZ75, because it has some meat on it, the 60 TP, so if you need a meaty heavy tank, then it can work if you don't have a BZ or an E100. But yeah, the BZ and the E100, in my opinion, are the best heavy tanks overall. And if you need a faster heavy tank that has turret armor, then you can bring the Type 71 or the M5Y. And then the rest of the picks are kind of more niche, like the E5, you can use it. It's perfectly viable. But usually the M5Y is going to be better because it doesn't have the cupola weak spot. T57 Heavy is a niche pick, but it can be extremely powerful. It's got a really good ability, and so if you know what you're doing with the T57, then I would say by all means you can play it. The Mouse is a really good tank for maps like Siegfried Line and Ensk, and maybe Pilsen. But you really only want to be bringing this tank on city maps where you know you're going to be fighting in a city, and you won't have to be doing rotations around the map, because it's just way too slow for it to work on pretty much any other map. And you need to make sure that you're playing with your team and taking the hits if you're playing the Mouse. Same goes for the E100 to an extent, for sure. You want to be taking the hits for your team and going in and using your DPM. IS-7, I wouldn't really recommend it. I know a lot of people would see this as a go-to tank, but I think that the E5, M5Y, and the BZ are more generalist tanks that are in general better. The I7 has a few niche uses, I think, maybe on like Cliff in some situations, but really I wouldn't recommend it overall if you have these other tanks like the Type 71, M5Y, T125, or the BZ. 50B is the same as a T57. It's a very niche pick, but it can be useful on some maps. But I wouldn't, if you don't know why you're bringing the 50B, then just don't pick it. You only want to ever pick the 50B if you have a very specific reason why you need to be in a 50B. And that goes for the T57. Well, it's less so for the T57, but especially for the 50B. And then the can opener is another good pick. It's another all-round pretty good heavy tank. It's kind of similar to the E5, but slower, but with better armor. And it is an okay tank to bring. It's just its DPM is quite a lot worse than the T110E5, as you can see. Like 500... like over 500 less, like 600 less DPM, and that's the main problem with this tank, along with its speed. But yeah, those are my general picks for heavy tanks. And then for tank destroyers, there are actually a decent amount that you can pick. So these are the ones I have selected. Some honorable mentions are the T110E4, which definitely can work. T110E3, V4, YAG can even work. The rest of them I honestly would not pick. They might have some very niche cases where they're okay, but I wouldn't mess around with them. So which TDs would I recommend overall? The best TD in my opinion is the Foch B. It's a good all-around tank. It's fast and it has a huge clip and it has a really good ability. It's hard to use the ability, so that's one downside of it, but besides that, it's a really strong tank to use. The 268 got not only a buff to its tank, but also a buff to its ability, so it's also a pretty strong tank destroyer to use. It's kind of on par with the Bliskowitza now, in my opinion. Maybe a little bit better than the Bliskowitza. The Bliskowitza is still relatively strong, but they did nerf the ability quite a lot. They nerfed the percent of damage that you take, the damage reduction. The damage reduction has been nerfed on this tank a little bit. And then also, you don't get the ability at the start of the game, which is a big nerf to this tank as well. But it can still be good on maps like Westfield. For example, Westfield is probably the main one. Some city maps like Siegfried Line and Pilsen, you can potentially use this tank as well, but it's kind of interchangeable with the Foch B on those maps. So, let's talk about... So those are the generalist TDs I would recommend for most players, like the Bliskowitza, the Object 268, and the Foch B. especially these two, I think. 268 is a little bit harder to play, so I would maybe not go with that one if you're not super confident in playing it. E4 is also okay, I guess, as a generalist TD. Now, for the more niche tank destroyer picks, you do have the 4005. Do not pick this tank unless you're like legend, or you're like a legend player. Just don't do it because it's just not it's not a very good tank for winning. Like, sure, you can maybe farm some damage if you're really good with the tank, but it's just you can't take hits with this tank, and it really you kind of just have to bait off your teammates in order to do damage in this tank, and so it's much better to pick a tank that can push in like the 268, the Foch B, and the Bliskowitza. And then another niche pick for the tank destroyers is the Grill 15. This tank is extremely powerful when you get a good situation for it. I wouldn't really use this in random Onslaught unless you're doing it with a platoon mate who's in a light tank. If you're just picking this tank all willy-nilly, then you're doing it wrong. This tank, unless you really know what you're doing, you shouldn't be picking this tank, in my opinion. And it's only good on a few maps anyways. So yeah, let's look at the tanks overall. And I'll just give you I'll just tell you which tanks you should be playing the most. So if you don't know what to pick in Onslaught, the best choices to be picking right off the bat are heavy tanks. So M5Y, T125, E100 is really strong. I would say E100 is probably the best tank you can pick if you don't need the speed. If you don't need the speed, then just pick E100. It's an extremely strong tank. Its ability was buffed, and it's got good DPM. It's got an insane amount of HP. So it's an extremely strong tank for city maps, especially, or if you need some kind of anchor tank. Can opener can work. It's not my preferred heavy, but it can work. And then the Type 71, I would say, is also a good pick, but I think the M5Y is slightly better for it, and then the BZ as well is a good pick. And all of these will differ slightly based on which maps you're playing and whether you need gun depression, whether it's okay for you to have a cupola. Like on Ensk, it doesn't really matter if you have a cupola because you're not playing hull down, whereas if you're playing on Westfield or Prokhorov, because not in the pool anymore. But if you need to be playing hull down, then you'd rather be in an M5Y. But if you don't need to be hull down, E5 is perfectly fine. But yeah, I generally prefer M5Y over the Type 71 in general. And so yeah, after you pick the heavy tanks, if your team has a need for medium tanks, then you pick medium tanks next. For average to even slightly above average players. You pick the heavies first. If your team still needs medium tanks for some reason, which usually you only need max like 2 or 3 mediums. Like Muravanka, maybe you want three mediums. 3, maybe 4, but most other maps you only really need like 2 or 3 mediums. And yeah, for the medium picks, E50M, Centurion Action X, if you don't have more than one on your team. Bat Chat if you're a more skilled player, and then 430U is another good pick. It's pretty interchangeable with the E50M. E50M is faster, but the 430U has better armor. That's kind of the trade-off between those two tanks. And yeah, so after the heavy tanks role have been filled, and then the medium tank role has been fulfilled, and you have enough medium tanks, only then would I really consider picking something else. Like, if you are confident in tank destroyers, then you can pick it. But otherwise, I would literally just stick with mediums and heavies for the most part. And yeah, for the tank destroyers, I already went over it earlier. Foch B, Bliskowitza, Object 268 are the main like brawling tank destroyers where you can actually use your health a little bit. And literally the rest of all the other tanks are more niche picks, or you have to really know what you're doing in order to be picking those tanks. Okay, so now let's go over how to set up tanks for Onslaught. Going over my list of tanks. So the first thing to know, when in doubt, use HP Turbo Rammer. It's that simple. On every single tank that you can use, pretty much. There's very few exceptions to this. If you can mount a rammer, you're using a rammer. And then the other two choices after that are going to be either experimental turbo or bond turbo, or whatever turbo you have. And then you just use regular HP. There's no need to use experimental HP in Onslaught because the module, there's a modifier so that you have more module HP. So ammo wrecks and engine destruction are very rare in Onslaught. So you should just use regular HP for the most part. The only exception is maybe the 430U, in which case you can use experimental, but even standard is fine in the 430U. But yeah, the rest just use regular HP. That's your best bet. It gives you the most amount of hit points, gives you the most amount of track hit points as well. So, and now I'm just gonna go over the exceptions to the rule. So literally everything HP Turbo Rammer. The only exceptions are things that can't mount rammer. So let's go over things that can't mount rammer next. AMX 50B, for example, can't mount rammer. Well, let's go over a different example actually. 50B, you can run some different stuff, but let's go over to the Batchet, for example. For tanks that can't mount rammer, you still run HP and the turbo, but then the last one you just pick vents or V-stab. It's that simple. So I have the wrong loadout on the 50B. I should probably have HP turbo V-stab, or actually HP turbo vents for the 50B. The 50B is a little bit of a special case because its ability gives it extremely good accuracy on the move, so you don't really need a V-stab at all. So I would actually run on the 50B vents turbo HP. And I do have another loadout on it. I'm not going to explain this. It's just not worth explaining. It's not necessary for you to know that, in my opinion. Let's go over next. So I addressed everything that can mount a rammer, and I also addressed everything that is an autoloader. So the only other exceptions are the Grill 15, which I would run rammer, turbo, and then actually low noise instead of hardening, because you need the low noise on a lot of maps. And then the other exception besides the Grill 15 is the light tanks. The light tanks are the only other exception. So for the RHM Panzer, I would run rammer, low noise, and hardening as my main loadout. The secondary loadout I think you can mess around with. That's what I'm running, but this is the best loadout for the main loadout in my opinion. You can run radio set instead of hardening maybe, but I just like hardening. I just like this loadout the best personally. And so do a lot of the other really good Onslaught players who play RHM Panzer. That's what they also run. Maybe they drop lowness for vents, but... And then for the EBR, this is the best loadout you can have on the EBR. Again, only play this tank if you really know what you're doing. Radio set in the boosted slot, and then low noise, and then optics. This is what you're going to be running on most maps in the EBR. I have an alternate loadout for... Actually, now that airfield is out of the pool, I don't think I would ever use this loadout, to be honest. I would just always use this loadout, to be honest. And then a couple things to note. Now that we talked about equipment and all the tanks that you should use, let me mention a few things about field mods. So there's some tanks like the Hurricane and the CS63, which have different field mods for loading speed. Pretty much any tank that gets a field mod for better loading speed, you want to be taking the better loading speed, and any field mod where you get extra hit points, you want to be taking the extra hit points. So that goes for the E50M. It has a field mod for extra hit points. It goes for the IS7 where you want extra hit points. And the reason why you take the better reload is because the accuracy in Onslaught is improved. So it already makes sense that you should your accuracy is already so good, you just need the extra DPM. And then I'm not going to talk too much about crew skills. Instead, what I'm just going to do is just click on some of my tanks, and you can just look at what crew skills I have. Probably I have the... Let's see. What's a good... Just take a look at E100 for heavy tanks. This isn't necessarily completely in order, but it's mostly in order. Ignore the perfect charge. You don't need that. I just have that on there because I use the big gun on the E100 sometimes. You should use the small gun on the E100 for Onslaught. For medium tanks, a lot of the time, if you're a medium tank that needs camo, then you bring camo on your crew. If not, then like if you're 430, you don't really need camo, you're gonna be brawling, then don't bring camo. And yeah, I'm just gonna click on some of these tanks, and you can look at the crew loadouts, and they're roughly similar. Let's look at a tank destroyer. For tank destroyers, for the Bliskowitza, you want to run double repair kits on one loadout, and you need to run Mentor along with that. You don't have to do this, but it's just good to run Mentor plus double repair kits. That way, if your crew dies, you don't need the med kit as badly. And the double repair kits is because your ability, Juggernaut, makes it so that you get instantly tracked no matter how much damage your track takes. I think I've looked at a light tank. Here's my light tank crews. Probably the RHM Panzer is going to be the best one to look at. You want controlled impact on everything as well, I should mention. Controlled impact on literally everything, even the bad chat, you know? And I think that's pretty much it that I wanted to cover here. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. And yeah, hopefully this will help you out on the battlefield in your Onslaught battles. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you, or share it with your friends who may be interested. Thank you all for watching. Goodbye.